Need help? Call our cybersecurity team and book a consultation with us today.
Thank you, everyone, for coming to the Cisco user group. There's a lot of new faces, so just a quick little housekeeping for those who might not know. We actually were started in 1999, so this is our 24th year, believe it or not, which I'm told by Cisco that makes us the oldest continuously running user group in the world. Um, we've had a lot of different homes over the years. Robert Yee and I have been involved since technically the second meeting in '99. The first meeting was just the three founders of the group, one of whom was going to stop by tonight. Maybe he'll still stop by, but I haven't seen him hop on yet. And we cover all sorts of topics. We are a Cisco user group, but we do sometimes go outside of Cisco. And in fact, next month, I will cover networking fundamentals in AWS. Which could involve Cisco objects, but it could also involve native AWS objects, but we'll talk about those, and I might run a little bit of a demo for everyone. And then in April, we're going to have a third party present, a company called Xenix, and they're going to talk about security operations centers. And they run a kind of like an outsourced security operations center and kind of what the pros and cons are of that, building your own versus outsourcing one. So those are the two next topics that we're going to be covering. But tonight, Andrew Dunsmore is going to cover network automation, and we'll talk a little bit about how to get started. We'll talk about the DevNet process, the DevNet certs. I met Andrew for the first time just about a month ago down in El Segundo. Um, and he's a really bright guy. I think we're going to really enjoy this topic. I will go ahead and quiet myself down, and Andrew, I'll let you take it over.
All right, yeah, thanks, Jason. So I wanted to cover specifically build your own automation because obviously there's a bunch of pre-canned automation tools, so we're not going to be covering those. But we will talk about how to use those pre-canned automation tools to make building your own automation much easier. So a quick background on myself, Andrew Dunsmore, I'm a Cisco systems engineer in Los Angeles. So I'm living in Santa Monica, but I'm originally from Canada, which is where I took this picture. And I spent a year and a half prior to being an SC. I was a automation technical solution specialist doing essentially Python automation for free for customers, which is a thing that Cisco actually does. It's a little known program because it only consists of about 20 people globally. But if you bug your account SE enough, they will engage them. And that was my full-time job, was using Cisco's like open automation tools to make Cisco's software hardware do whatever customers wanted it to do when it didn't do it on its own. So basically I was like a feature developer for features that didn't get supported. Yeah, but I was going to talk today about, that meant that for a long time, I was hearing about what people actually wanted automation to do for them, what they saw as the shortcomings of the pre-canned solutions, what value adds they wanted, and what customizations they wanted. So we're going to talk a little bit about some of the projects that I worked on and that my team worked on, and then more importantly, if you were to come up with an idea or if you want to see what's out there, how can you do that on your own? And what kind of resources are available. And then finally, if you want to get certified for either your own learning or for a possible career move, all of that, I have 3 DevNet certifications. So I have the DevNet Associate and I have 2 DevNet specializations in data center and in enterprise automation. So I don't have the Dev Core, which is a full CCNP DevNet, but I do have, I'm like 1 exam away. With that, I will begin with the presentation. So what's going on? what is DevNet like? What is it all about? We're gonna jump right into like, why do you actually care? and what does automation mean in networks, at least from what I've seen. Oh, I already talked about myself, but this is me at Cisco Live in the DevNet zone. Highly recommend. We had an autonomous race car. It was fantastic. Okay, the basic 5 use cases that we would come into are doing things faster, doing, or actually, sorry, first one being agility. So making changes in a essentially quicker way, agile way, responding so that maybe you have something that triggers a change automatically in the network. So overall, increasing like agility, accelerating time to deploy is a huge one. So if your network has a lot of branch sites, or if you're just making, you're looking down a giant deployment project, that can help. So still, the next one, business intelligence, is largely like, how can I actually extract more meaningful information from the network so that I'm being more proactive to support my business instead of just trying to keep the lights on. So there's a lot of cases, particularly with Meraki, where you can take a lot of and extract a lot of intelligence out of the network, mostly through things like location, that kind of stuff, but also user behavior. Cost reduction, just being more efficient in general, and avoiding pesky fat fingering, copy paste errors, that kind of thing. There's also the flip side of that you can automate yourself into a very bad spot. So don't have a test. Don't practice, because we've all seen the Facebooks and who is it, Microsoft Azure more recently.
Yeah.
Who pushed a change, and then all of a sudden, the whole Asia Pacific West can't reach SharePoint. So there is that possibility, but with great power comes great responsibility, I suppose. Yeah, so I wanted to jump right away. What does this actually mean? Because the big question everyone always has is like, why do I care? And what are other network engineers, network automation folks, what are they doing? So I've taken the customers out of these just because I didn't ask their permission first. But I'll say, when I was in Canada, one of the many banks that we have up there is subject to strict audit requirements. So this falls into my favorite category of get the annoying work that the boss wants done quicker. So that's a huge, actually, like this drove a lot of cases where executives or leadership wanted to see a particular report or a particular spreadsheet or a particular summary of the data from the network so that they could feel happy and they could but in all honesty, they could get a clear picture of what's going on. And a lot of the times it is to appease audit requirements. So in this case, the audit requirements for Canadian banks are actually stricter than what DNAC supports natively. So this was also a case of we'll say expanding the features of what Cisco will provide to you automatically. So we needed to retain and visualize data for up to 2 years back, which was more than what DNA Center did at the time. So what we did is we pulled this data we used DNA Center to collect the data as it is designed and purpose-built to do. But then we pulled it automatically. So this would just run every week or every month, however often you want it to run. And then we would push that data to an Elastic Stack or an Elk Stack that would make it searchable in Elasticsearch. And you can visualize here. I think somebody just joined. Or David, we are getting a bit of a feedback from you.
Yeah, sorry.
So this is one example of how can we enhance the functionality of the box. How can we make the boss happy, and all of that help the team up there look a lot. Overall, they got executive level support from this, and it was a big win for them because they didn't have to do all of this manually, like keep track of 2 years worth of reports, and that helped them a lot. So second one, supporting firepower. It supports dynamic objects, but those objects are mostly for cloud providers who change their IP addressing and that kind of thing all the time. but this customer had internal dynamic objects, which Firepower didn't support at the time. So they created their own script to be able to support this for them. So pretty simple. You're expanding. You're again doing something that isn't natively supported because the unique network requires it. So you would add or remove hosts, and then you would just run the sync changes, and it would sync across the firewall. So basically, just making this task of having things change in the network, making it just easier for them to perform because they were doing it pretty often. And the last one, this one was another one that I did where you had ACI Fabric Act migration, where the customer wanted to have stand-in, like 2 ACI fabrics stood up. And there are some problems for everyone who's done ACI with how they do physical interface configurations. You couldn't have, they would want you to move it completely, but they didn't want to just move it logically over. They wanted to instantiate the new logical construct on their refresh gear. But so they would have them standing side by side with the exact same config before they cut the cable over. That is harder to do than you might think. So we helped them script this. This one was in Ansible. Because I have a lot of opinions about ACI automation, I recommend Ansible if anyone's doing it. There is an API, I recommend Ansible. So this was just looping through and collecting the configuration and then pushing it out to the new gear. Anyways, so that's a few examples that I just wanted to share. Again, highlighting, making the boss happy, doing things faster, doing things that require a lot of click and drag and staring and comparing so that, oh yeah, a big part of the last one was you're not staring and comparing, which can be error prone, especially when you have to do it across 60 plus switches. So that's a lot of the places where we saw value was just being able to work around the particular frustrations, repetitions that are just built into the tools that are provided. I'm going to stop there. Does anyone have any questions? Anything before I kind of change topics?
Yeah, I do. Sorry. This is
Yeah.
Elmer.
Hi.
I'm kind of new to automation. I have a project right now where we would have to build initial configuration scripts for maybe 120 routers and about 200 switches, and right now we have a very old antiquated Perl script that would pull data off Excel 2003 formatted spreadsheets and populate a build, like a initial configuration script with port description, VLAN assignments on ports, point-to-point, IPsec, tunnel IP addresses, things like that. And it's really cumbersome. And, a lot of it is like native knowledge that a lot of the older engineers are not, willing to share or have left the company. So we're trying to modernize it, the simplest way and the best way we could. I don't know if you've, encountered that or, any suggestions on what we can do.
I have seen people use Google Sheets to host configurations, and then because it has a changelog, so it's a way of hosting a text file which has a changelog built into it, so you can kind of see if someone who made the change, when they made the change. So if something breaks, they can roll it back. It's an interesting way of doing it. So I have seen spreadsheets pushed to configs in a more modern sense. It's possible for sure. And I'd be happy to try to find that for you and send it out to you after, as well as maybe a few other kind of suggestions. But yeah, I can definitely stick around after to chat with you more about it.
Oh yeah, thank you.
Hey, Andrew, quick question. You personally, how did you get your start in automation? Did you study it in college or something and kind of just, you're like, well, I've already kind of learned the basics? Or did you start like, hey, I don't really know what this is, but I think I better figure out? Or What was
Yeah,
yours?
so me personally, I studied electrical engineering, so I knew how to code C, and I knew how to code a couple. I took like a course on Java, and then I was working at a little Swedish company called Ericsson, and they had me similar, like it wasn't IT, it was radio hardware development as an electrical engineer, but they had my job was very repetitive. And a lot of what I was doing was like I would have to set something up, and then I have to go like grab a coffee, come back, change it, go, drink a tea, come back, change it. It's like check the results, make a couple elementary decisions, change it. And I was like, I could do this way easier if we had a proper testing suite. So I coded up, I learned Python just to do that. So I have a lot of sympathy, and like I have a lot of understanding for network engineers who are thinking along the same lines, where you're like learning because you're thinking, oh my God, I keep making these changes that would be a lot simpler if I had some kind of mechanism to perform them over and over. And if I could just give it the intelligence of how to make decisions, that would be fantastic. So I taught myself Python over the course of that experience. Basically, instead of getting coffee between the 20-minute breaks in the hardware test, I would do the really boring work, and then while I was waiting for it to run, I would code it in Python and I would test it. So eventually I got pretty good at that. And then when I joined Cisco, they just allowed me to continue learning that, and I took the same knowledge that I had from coding those Python scripts, and I just started applying them to learning APIs and using the toolkits that Cisco had available. And fortunately, they gave me a lot of time to play with it, and they hired me onto the team where that was my full-time job for a little while. So it was a combination of like self-learning, learning in school, and learning on the job with Cisco.
Thank you.
So for somebody who's got some background coding in C, what do you think the transition to Python is like?
Easy. Python's the easiest language I've worked with for sure. Yeah, it's much easier to work with. And I'll show you guys. I'll show what I would recommend. This is actually this part here that I was gonna hop into, is places for you to go to learn and to actually because I always think the best way to do things. There's a reason I'm putting this part before the certifications part, because I believe the best way to learn something is just to do it. So I can, and we have a ton of ways to do that. If that I'm happy to showcase. Was there any other questions, or otherwise I'll just hop into exactly what I was just talking about.
And you can hear me?
Do it.
Yeah. Oh, was there a question? Did you have a question, David?
Yes. I'm new at this, and I was very amazed about the network automation. What is the difference between network AI and network automation? Is that the same thing as?
No, I wouldn't call them the same thing. I would call network AI to be almost always it's going to be provided to you as a product or service, software from a vendor. So something, and that is in almost all cases, it's going to be something that consumes telemetry from your network and then provides you some kind of machine reasoning. So for example, like I know Cisco, so I'll give the Cisco example, is DNA Center TAC has, just an insane amount of logs from networks all over the world that have been submitted for common causes of problems, like STP storms and that kind of thing. And it knows what the results of that, what the causes of that are. And so it'll ingest your network's telemetry and then provide you a recommendation that, oh, this particular access point has too many clients connecting to it on a daily basis. Like it started off with 8, like 2 months ago, it had 8 clients connected, and now it's got 50 clients and it's oversubscribed, and they're all getting very poor wireless experience. So that's like AI. Network automation can also be done either through a product or service provided by a vendor, but it can also be done on your own
Okay.
using like a ton of open source tools that we'll go into. And that is going to require a little bit more work,
Okay.
but it is going to also produce more results where AI is just going to give you like the recommendations. So it's kind of two different ways of approaching like optimizing a network.
Okay. Thank you very much.
So I'll hop into developer resources, and I'm going to give exactly one link because it's the best link. Actually, I'm going to go here. So we have for Cisco developer.cisco.com, and it's phenomenal. Even when I was this is the first place I would go every new project I got. Even when I was like very confident that I knew what I was doing, this is always the first place I would come. So this is the landing page, but the real everything you are going to want is here. So documentation, learning resources, links to what's possible with different technologies, and then the community forums. So I'll go documentation first. This is like every API that Cisco has. So it's obviously quite a list. We have a lot. They are of varying quality, but for the most part, especially the last few years, there's been a huge emphasis on making them better. So for example, I'll click the DNA Center one. We can see the overview, giving authentication, which is always going to be very important when you have an API. The first thing you're going to need to be able to do is to actually access it with the right authentication. And then it'll explain everything that the API can do. And then you can go into, there'll be guides, quick start guides, everything. Like DNA Center is pretty dense, so there's a lot of different guides for how to accomplish all of the different use cases. And then there's the documentation here. Sorry, it's a little, I know it's a little confusing when I'm just clicking around, but I'm just clicking the different links on the left here to where you literally have like the API docs itself to show, okay, for example, I had someone ask, can I search by MAC can I search a client by MAC address in DNA Center and find out like where can I get client details about that? So I can search here MAC, I can see, okay, here we go, returns client information retrieved by MAC address for a given endpoint. Okay, so this is how I would do it. I get details about how this works. And you can test it out on your own. If you have, if you do have DNA Center hooked up, you can put the host, the base path, and add in your variables and your authentication. You can actually run calls out to your DNA Center from the docs themselves, just to give you, so that you can actually like test these all out. If you don't have a DNA Center, or whatever technology, so we have like routers, whatever, we do have sandboxes that you can spin up to practice, to check them out on your own. So actually, I'll go to that second. So first, all the documentation for literally everything we have is all posted here. So it's like you don't need to go search around tons of different, like, do I need to go to the DNA Center website or whatever? It's all here. The learning part is awesome because there's new to programming, start here. If you want to do learning labs, they're here. All right. So this will give you a few, like if you want to start coding in APIs, networking 101, enterprise networking, there's a ton of different ones. Or I can go directly, say, to Meraki. And these are a series of labs that they consolidate. So here's Meraki fundamentals. There's 2 modules. We can see it's about 3 hours worth of content. That's generous. It's usually less, but it kind of assumes that you're starting from scratch. And you can start these modules, and there'll just be a ton of different step-throughs that'll walk you through like what you're doing, what you're accomplishing, what the basis of the API is. And then there's actual like labs here, so you can code directly in the. All right, let's go. Here we go. So they do load up an editor so that you can run this, similar to if you've ever used the Cisco Learning Labs for. There we are. So this is taking care of probably the biggest barrier to learning, which is just literally getting something started in a functional sense. So you can immediately kind of step in and it'll walk you through some basic code. And that this goes from very beginning to rather complicated. Like there's some very advanced use cases in these learning modules that I found incredibly helpful. And if I don't, the biggest thing about programming is to like not duplicate effort. So a lot of the times if I got a new ask for someone, and so I started when I was on that team, if I started a Meraki case, like I would go back to the Learning Center. I would go to technologies here. Let's go networking. Let's go Meraki. And there's a ton of resources here, including like learning labs, all that stuff, sandboxes, Google Learning Labs, and it links you back to the exact same stuff where there's just a ton of different like tracks that you can go down. And so it'll show just a ton of resources available here. It's honestly a lot of duplication. So tracks are just collection of modules. So you can click on the tracks or you can go directly to the modules. There's just going to be a lot more modules, or you can go directly to the labs.
Hey, Andrew, are
Am
you
I not
still
sharing
sharing?
anymore?
Yeah, it doesn't look like you're sharing any longer.
All right, I lost it. There we go. We're back.
Yep.
Cool. So that's what I wanted to overview for developer.cisco.com. Same thing if you go to the technologies you can pick. So if you know you're going to be working in data center, you know you're going to be working in ACI, you can go here and it'll overview, okay, what is ACI? How do I get started? Beginner documentation, advanced documentation. So this will bring you into what the ACI policy model guide is. So all the way from if you're literally just getting started to if you are very comfortable in ACI and now you want to start getting under the hood with it, it's all available in the same spot. Anyways, I love this website. I used to live in it all the time. So that's that. Any questions about developer.cisco.com?
No, it is a phenomenal. If you've never used it before, it is a pretty phenomenal resource. And it's all that stuff's free that he's showing you. It's just incredible.
Yeah. This is all just here. So if you want to get started from the beginning, like, and you're brand new and you're not sure what this is all about, you can it starts from the very beginning here, and it'll just walk you through all of it. Better than the textbook. Don't get the textbook. Just do this. Yeah, it's definitely something that I believe very strongly in learning hands-on and not through a book. All right, other times, DevNet Test Drive. If you're in the Los Angeles area, I will be in Cisco's Irvine office March 8th and 9th. So we're going to be just doing a lot of this hands-on with a number of Cisco SEs. It's a whole roadshow. Some of our heads of programmability and automation are going to be there. There's going to be a ton of content, mainly around DNA Center and Meraki, as well as just API fundamentals. So I wanted to throw that out there. If you want to spend a day learning, it's kind of like a mini. The goal is for it to be kind of like a mini Cisco Live session where any of the hands-on Cisco Live content, we're going to be bringing it to Los Angeles. And then speaking of Cisco Live, you can come to Cisco Live. There's a whole DevNet zone. I worked it for 4 days last year. It was a great time. That's where the race car was. All right.
A little further north.
There's going to be one in San Francisco. There's going to be a Cisco Test Drive.
I was thinking like LA, Ventura, that area.
Wish. I wish.
Oh, of course, you're in Santa Monica.
I'm in Santa Monica, yeah. So we closed our Glendale office, so we have a harder time doing that. If enough people email me, I can run it out of a rentable workspace like a WeWork or something like that, or I can get one of our reseller partners to lend me their office. So if enough people email me, adunsmu@cisco.com, that they would show up, How about Canada? There's going to be one in Toronto. DevNet Test Drive Toronto. They're going to do about 20 locations across the US. The closest two here are Irvine and San Francisco. There will be one in Toronto. I don't know if there's one in Vancouver. I'm going to try to talk them into flying me out.
Is that something that's customers only, or is it open to partners as well?
Yeah, it's open to anybody. It's just,
Okay.
yeah, it's if you want to come, it's doors open. It's Cisco doors open.
Will there be any virtual option for it?
I don't have the details on that yet. They're just sorting it out. There also isn't a registration page yet. It's supposed to come early next week, so I can send that to Jason to forward to everybody. Or if you email me, I will email it directly to you. So I'm not sure if it was a point of debate whether or not they were going to accommodate a virtual option or not.
Thank you.
I would like it to have a virtual option because a lot of the people I work with live in north of Los Angeles. So for me personally, and a lot of my customers and other engineers I work with, it would be very nice. But yeah, those events, and then the DevNet Zone was one of the coolest parts of Cisco Live, in my opinion. Like the talk tracks and everything there, tons of labs, tons of brilliant people. And selfishly, all those people I worked with, 20 people across the globe, they're all there. So that was extremely exciting for me to see because they live in like Singapore and Germany and New Zealand. It was the most global team I've ever been part of. Okay, so certifications, I'm putting this second because I believe being hands-on is more important than certifications, but certifications are definitely there and they make an excellent career move and they are a good way to guide your learning. So the first certification is the DevNet Associate. The second certification, and that's going to be just general. It's just Cisco's intro to DevNet and automation. Then DevNet Specialists is going to be more of a CCNP type comparison where you have enterprise route and switch, you have data center, you have collaboration. So all of those have automation specialties. Security as well. And then the DevNet Professional is a big boy DevNet Associate exam. That's just a core programming exam plus one DevNet Specialist. So there's the Dev Core exam itself. And I think to get the DevNet Professional, like the CCNP designation, it's the Dev Core exam plus one of the specialization exams. So I hold Dev 2 of these. I haven't done the Dev Core. I did the enterprise automation and I did the data center automation. I was just gonna roll through real quick, like what kind of stuff is on the DevNet Associate. So things like JSON syntax. This is how we store a ton, both encoding and decoding data from the network into JSON, which is like a machine readable format.
What does the acronym stand for?
JavaScript object notation or something like that?
I think that's right.
Yeah, JavaScript object notation or something like that.
I know a few of the others. XML is extensible markup language.
Yeah. My favorite is YAML.
YAML, yeah, yet another markup language. That's in a couple seconds. So this is on there. The terminologies and API query is on there. So you've got to break down that URL into and the overall API call. So you have a method, which is going to be, am I posting, am I removing, am I updating, am I deleting? Get, put, post, and patch. Then there's the path to the resource that I want to access. There's a protocol. Headers are like your encapsulation. If you're going from, it's like your IP headers. It's exactly the same thing. Response body is your payload. Status code gives you an idea of if it worked or not. So you probably know a few of these already. 200 is okay, 404 not found, 500 server error, those kind of things. So that's all on there. Oh, here we go, yeah. 500 this kind of stuff is all on there. Oh yes,
Is REST versus some other type of API, or
yeah. There's what defines a REST API,
yeah,
which I'm blanking on right now. Stateful. I forget what the R stateful
representation?
something like this. I took this exam almost 2 years ago, so it's some of the semantics I'm a little dusty on, but yet another next generation markup language is in here. So data modeling. So how do we represent? How can we turn a switch configuration into a data model that is digestible and understandable by a machine program? So that's on there. netconf and Yang. So a lot of this is putting these things together. So netconf is a configuration method that allows a controller to push a config down to any switch router network device. It uses a data model, so because it's machine to machine communication, so it needs to be a machine readable data model, and that data model is going to use a particular kind of markup. So it's 102 hours, 102 questions, multiple choice, multi-response, fill in the blank. If you've taken a Cisco exam before, it's very similar to the CCNA. And the breakdown here, yeah, so compare data formats, we talked about that, utilize comments. So there's version control. So we were talking about before, why someone put their config in Google Sheets, because it has version control. So if someone changes something, you have a record and a log of that. That's huge in software development, especially if you're going to do multi-person software development. You need to be able to keep up to date with the dev work that's been done. So we use Git for that. That's on there. Understanding and using APIs, troubleshooting is on there. It's Cisco, so Cisco's content is on there in terms of understanding the basics of using Meraki's APIs, DNA Center APIs, and ACI and SD-WAN. Containerization. So if you've heard of containers versus virtual machines, that's on there. And then kind of understanding the benefits of both, and a few things around automation tools that are more structured, like Ansible, Puppet Chef.
Andrew, I have a question.
Yeah.
Okay, on the application deployment security, does it touch a little bit on network forensics? I know it doesn't go that much deep, but does it touch a little bit, a little taste on network forensics, as far as find out the source or where the attack's coming from, anything like that?
No, it's that would be more of a security. So
Okay.
This is more about application deployment is going to be about, are we deploying a bare metal virtual machine or containerization? What's the difference between a container and a virtual machine? And the security part of that is more about how do you, now that you're passing data across the network, like how are you making sure that this is like you're encrypting, you're storing, you're transporting data in a responsible way. And you have to understand a few things like cross-site scripting, SQL injections, and I forget what the CSRFs are, but a couple different common attacks that have to do with exploiting vulnerabilities in software development.
Okay. Thank you.
So the full list is here. It's also on developer.cisco.com/certifications.
And Andrew, I had a quick question. I think you already kind of touched on this, but I just wanted to make sure that it was clear for everyone. If someone was interested in getting this certification, do you feel that the best path forward is just go do all the free training up on the developer.cisco.com, or do you recommend a combination of that and a course? Because I think DevNet does also have like a subscription-based course, or I don't know. What are your thoughts there?
Yeah. So this is what I would do. three things that I did for all of my exams. One was the learning track. So there is a learning track for the DevNet Associate on the developer.cisco.com. It walks you through modules that are related to the exam topics on the developer guide. Also here, like if we go here, it has the full list of topics and it has study materials. So you can kind of click like a brief introduction to Git, and it's going to take you to the Git module. So this is, and you can go learn Git. So this is probably the best. Also, it's free, so shout out to that. This is probably the first thing I would do is I would go through every one of these bullets and just do all of these labs. They're all not, or modules, I should say. You can kind of go through them at your own pace. If you think you've got it, feel free to skip ahead. If you don't, you can go however you want. And that would be my recommendation, is to do it. There is a fair amount of memorization on these exams, which I absolutely despise in terms of but it's a programming exam. It's very difficult to not have memorization on a programming exam. It's not just Cisco. Like when I was a student, we had programming exams. Like there was still stupid memorization that you don't need to memorize because the documents are always going to be freely available. But it is what it is. It's more about testing if you've done it. So that comes into play more for like the Cisco platforms and development. It'll ask you, what, how, the biggest thing you have to memorize is how to authenticate to every API. That they will almost without fail, they will ask you, how do I authenticate to DNA Center's API? How do I authenticate to the SD-WAN API? Like authentication, you'll have to is the easiest way to cash in on those memorization points. And so it's easier to memorize things when you've done them, I find, instead of reading them. But yeah, that's the biggest thing. That's a tip. All of these exams really push the authentication piece because it's the easiest, because the APIs can be so large, but the authentication is only this big. So memorizing that is way easier than trying to like guess at which of the full APIs and everything. So that's what they test. That's pretty good. So developer.cisco.com is good. The textbook is good if you like textbooks. So that's perfectly fine if you want to do textbook. And then CBT Nuggets, I took their course for the DevNet Associate. It was good. I liked it. They did a good job. So I will give them a shout out for that.
Excellent. Thank you very much.
Combination.
Yeah.
That's actually all the content I had, but I'm happy to hang around and chat further about any of this.
Ansible.
Yes.
It's the one space that I have any background in, and I found it insanely useful.
Yes.
How does that integrate into everything else that you've been discussing here? Because for me, it just sits as kind of a standalone space that I was able to use to playbook changes out to 30 remote offices and just save unbelievable amounts of time.
Yeah, Ansible, I used it on a number of occasions, especially if you're working with a controller. So if you're working with, for example, ACI, I wouldn't do just there is an API for ACI. In fact, everything you do in the GUI is actually just a GUI for the API. But the Ansible makes things like way easier because they've packaged up all of the kind of frustrations that you might have to deal with if you were to do it more manually. So it is on all the tests, like being able to read and understand an Ansible playbook is on all of the tests. And Ansible playbooks are one of the easiest ways to get involved, to actually see, like you said, to get involved into code something up from scratch, like Ansible makes it as digestible as can be. I
And
would
it's
say.
free.
And it's free.
And it works with not just Cisco stuff, but everybody's stuff.
Yeah, that's the big one too, is you can really standardize on it. So yeah, that's the great thing about it. The drawback is it will push out configuration to your switches. It doesn't it doesn't have like a historical view. So
Right.
you need to it'll tell you what it did, like it'll push it all out and it'll tell you what it did, and it will not redo things that it doesn't need to redo. Like it has a level of intelligence, but it's very difficult to use Ansible to, it doesn't keep a historic record in the way that a permanent management console would. Versioning, yeah. But it's awesome for, like you said, provisioning. I love it for provisioning. I love it for deploying changes that you're going to have to make. So I really recommend it as a solid tool.
Well, it started out as what you were saying, get the work done that the boss wants done. And
yeah.
So we're like, okay, script this out, push it, and then go do what you really want to do.
And yeah, don't duplicate effort. You can find Ansible. ChatGPT is weirdly good at making Ansible playbooks.
Really?
Yeah. We'll see. ChatGPT is also getting worse at things over time, not better. So that's interesting. But I have seen
It's a good segue, though.
I have seen people. I have seen people say create an Ansible playbook to change host name of a Cisco IOS XE switch, and it makes a runnable, functional playbook that does that. It will require some debugging, but it's kind of interesting. If you have so more and more with these kinds of things, the human's job is going to be identifying where these tools have value. And the actual accessibility of how good you need to be at coding and to see the value is going down. So that's pretty neat. And if you can get good at identifying good use cases, I mean, things like ChatGPT and that kind of stuff are getting better and better at making the semantics less of an obstacle.
It's both cool and scary at the same time.
Don't worry, I have made a habit of throwing questions that I get into ChatGPT, and it almost always is wrong. So it's not good yet.
But it's going to get there.
Yeah, it's going to get better.
More likely quickly.
Yeah.
And then also in the Ansible space, and then Python, do you use that as kind of an overarching method of launching other things and then pulling things back and making decisions based on it? Or
so the interesting thing about, at first, Cisco is really, and in the exams kind of reflect this, because the original approach was we want to teach network folks Python, and they're going to start to use things like RESTconf, NetConf, for example. It's like, but more and more, it's like, okay, you don't really need to know Python. You need to know enough Python to hit an API, or enough Python to use an SDK, which is called a standard development kit, which is an API that has, similar to Ansible, it's wrapped up those capabilities and those semantics into a more digestible package. So Meraki's API, you don't even need to use the Meraki API. You can use the Meraki SDK, which is simpler and more straightforward and more human readable. So because the API will have that like get and then a giant URL. So if I wanted to get my list of Meraki networks, it would have to be like get and then the big URL with my Meraki dashboard, and then I would have to slash and then introduce like put my network IDs and everything in it, And I would have to do that every time I wanted to make a request to the Meraki dashboard. The Meraki SDK is cool because once you initialize it, you say like dashboard dot like Meraki dot dashboard, and you put your credentials in, and where your dashboard is, and your authorization to be able to hit that dashboard via the API. And from then on in, you can do like dashboard dot get networks, dashboard dot get interfaces, dashboard dot whatever the API call is, and it's like almost English. So SDKs, that's why we see such a huge, we see a lot more success with the Meraki API than we do with other ones, because it's almost English. So you don't need to be highly proficient in Python to use it. You need to be proficient enough to recognize how to get it running and how to instantiate and like get it loaded up. And then from there on in, it's just a matter of like parsing, getting the information you want out of it, and then making the changes that you want to see happen. So it's a lot less complicated than something like C or anything else like that. It's getting much more approachable.
Back on the Ansible track, do you know anybody who has used the commercialized version from Red Hat?
I have a customer that does.
Or how happy are they with the support level from Red Hat in that?
Yeah, I'm just not on the right team. I know that they're happy with the product in general, but I don't know specific on support.
Okay.
I would say, yeah, you need to have some know-how, right? But it's definitely powerful. I don't know anyone. I don't have anyone using it as far as I am aware.
Okay. The only reason I ask is our institution has a relationship with Red Hat, and they were pushing it, but I hadn't found a reason to go with the supported version rather than what's publicly available.
What devices is this available for? Can we use this like on the 3650s and routers and stuff like that?
Like Ansible playbooks?
No. Well, using DevNet and stuff like that for this stuff.
Yeah, it goes pretty far back. So there's an iOS, it's built into iOS XE parts of it. It all depends on how you want to attack it, right? So there's typically two different ways you can attack it. You can attack it on a per device level, or you can attack it if you have some form of controller. Like for example, Meraki, your only option is to go through the Meraki dashboard. And then through the Meraki dashboard, you can reach out to any of those devices. So it's available for everything. For some of the old iOS XE things, let's see, how far back does it go? I wonder, I'm not sure what the first version of iOS XE that supports its API is. And then obviously the Catalyst equivalent is if it's connected to DNA Center, you don't actually have to hit the individual devices. You can hit the DNA Center API and get pretty much everything you'd want, or push anything you'd want through that controller. But the individual devices, let's take a look on the documentation to see what they say about the iOS XE API. Just give me a second here.
You're talking about 3650. The highest you can go on that probably is 15 something.
You need version 16.3 is the prerequisite for, this is specifically for enabling netconf. So honestly, it depends on, because netconf and restconf are open RFC, like derived from RFCs. So As of iOS 16.3, RESTconf and NetConf connections should be authenticated, yada yada. So it sounds like that is the first version that has full support for at least those two. The per device work, I will say, is a little bit more. It requires a little bit more effort than if you're going through a controller. So that's why most of like the exams and stuff will focus on going through a controller. Not just because Cisco's trying to sell you a controller, but those are literally the easier things to test. And then the higher level up exams get more into AOS XE and like the specific OS, because the OSs are going to deal more with RESTconf, NetConf configuration models, which are a bit more complicated.
All right, thank you.
Oh, and Ansible. Yeah, right. This is a good case to recommend Ansible for managing devices instead of the iOS XE API. Definitely, I recommend starting with Ansible.
Ah, okay.
Yeah, if you're going device by device, I would say I would recommend Ansible.
And if your stuff is really old, Ansible doesn't support Telnet.
I didn't know that. That's interesting.
I didn't know that either.
Yeah, there's customized ways of getting around that, but by default, it's all SSH based.
Interesting.
You have to find people who have written Python subroutines in order to handle stuff that doesn't support SSH.
This is what I mean. Half of programming is just getting around the restrictions of whatever it is you were trying to get to do, that it didn't do the thing you wanted it to do, so somebody got around it. Yeah, that if you're that would be my first. If I would investigate. I'm not seeing an initial version that. I'm not seeing any kind of posted restriction, at least on this page, for how far back Ansible goes. But that would be my recommendation as the first place to go, rather than doing straight iOS XE, like, yeah, model-driven programming. It's interesting because that's what all of the like massive networks do, like the Amazons and the Googles of the world, is they use OpenConfig to write their own domain controllers and that kind of stuff. But they have software engineers like nobody has business, so they can afford that kind of thing.
Yeah. Well, this has been great. Does anyone have any other questions before we turn off the recording and call it a night?
I can stick around. Somebody was asking about the initial config scripts. If you want to chat more and more, like one-on-one, I'm happy to stick around.
Need help? Call our cybersecurity team and book a consultation with us today.